You may have seen this video before. We wanted to start with this catastrophe, the destruction in 2012 of the Kodak factories that used to provide the silver prints material. We are going to talk about silver prints here. So this was the Chalon-sur-Saône factory, but there were all the Kodak factories have been destroyed.
Alors on va commencer par une première question.
Okay, we'll begin with the first question.
Oui, on peut se présenter.
Welcome to everyone. All right. I'm the former director of the Élysée Museum in Lausanne. I'm also an exhibition curator, supposedly retired. I decided to stop photography at the end of my career. So I still have 50 years ahead of me. No, sorry, I contributed for 50 years to photography. I am fascinated. I'm not in the photography market, but I appreciate the quality of the printing. When I was invited by Florence to moderate this session, I accepted because I also have questions. I
am now going to give the floor to Jonas. Hi, my name is Jonas Tebib. I worked at several photography galleries and then moved to auction houses, which really can show us an overview. I am now a consultant, an advisor.
To buy and sell photo collections. So we're really within the topic. So I was the pupil of Françoise in a photography class. I was very proud, a good teacher, says the quote, is someone who is progressively unuseful. Françoise Paviot, gallery created by Alain Paviot 50 years ago. So I have a gallery activity. I also like to teach, share, and I also curate a lot of exhibitions. So we all worked a lot. We got along fine. Something simple, accessible to reflect on. Well, first question, what is vintage? Just a little preamble. my children who are 20 years old. Vintage means clothes, out, outdated but redated probably. So there is an aspect, a respect for the past. The connotations are positive. It indicates something with a value. So I will ask Françoise, who has 50 years experience with this word, to define more precisely this term. So, vintage, the word comes from the English term vendange. It was used to characterize photographs that were printed. So the importance of the printing there, that were printed close to the moment when the photographs were taken. The printing is an intention. It takes place at a precise moment. We will develop this over the time. We will provide you with numerous examples. So there is this notion of authenticity and past. Okay. It might not be valid today because we evolve with time, but we will now travel in the modern age, in the 20th century. Françoise, do we know who first used the term? Well, I made a survey in the United States. Okay, I will tell you an anecdote I never told anyone, very quickly because we do not have much time. In the 70s, recently, I made a survey, an inquiry, and people told me it's Harry Log, it's this one or that one. I think I have the solution through a friend. I won't tell you who, but it's a gallerist who one day told that friend of mine, well, I met this gallerist who told me, let's call these photographs printed at the time vintages. And I wondered how this guy could have found such an incredible and good idea. So it's a term, well, used for photography as from the 70s, 80s. It is true that, to come back on what you said, the notion of vintage is related to quality in time. I'm talking about clothes here. Besides the fact that you're in the spirit of the photographer when they take the photograph, it's also a quality of printing and what we're going to develop afterwards. So there is also the legal aspect. Such a photography, it's in the 5 years to describe a photograph that is printed just after it has been taken, to know when it has been printed. Sometimes you don't have any. So sometimes it's a bit enlarged to other terms that are going to be used afterwards. Normally it's that. So when it's called of the time, it's called 5 years after the photograph was taken.
The second question is that related with the 19th century? What you can see here is daguerreotype. I remember back in the day somebody telling me this is just a reference to my colleague Jean-Luc Tartarin with a beautiful booth. There are beautiful, very beautiful daguerreotypes on his booth. They are unique works. Do go and have a look. There are no copies available anywhere. Yes, and this is related to the end of a daguerreotypy, because if we think about paper photography, the competition of paper photography, yes, because photography was invented back in the days in the 19th century where we were looking to industrialization, this multiplicity. And instead of having multiplicity, we end up with one unique piece of works. So a failure in a way. But if you look at these daguerreotypes, you will find exceptional quality. Of course, we're not going to go through the full history of photography right now. We would not have time, unfortunately, but we are going to turn directly to camera rolls. You can see here Negre, the middle of the 19th century, really, when Fox Talbot invented really this notion of photo negative, of negative film. And then we can have multiples of these images. You can see the positive and the negative film. Here are the differences. You can see, yes, we can have several prints. We can have several positives out of these negatives. Absolutely. You can see here the first shooting studios. This is Fox Talbot in about 1940, 1840, sorry, 1850. So here you can see assistants. We're outdoors. We don't have access to power, electricity yet. Electricity already is available, but just not linked available everywhere. And so it's the daylight is used for photography, and you can see small prints exposed to sunlight, which will reveal the image. So we have to, of course, mention that up to the digital age, photography, the principles around photography rely fully on the silver salts and their reaction to light, right? Absolutely. Yes, let's directly look into this setup. You can see very crafty craftsman setup. You can see a contemporary device here. You all know it, I believe. And we know that this is how we're going to start working with expansion. And so we can stretch the photos, work in the dark room. And so this is where the photographies then can be printed through different applications. So this is what this device looks like in detail. The idea is we apply this film and we've got the enlarger head, and we can enlarge to a different size. And so that's when we can print in larger format. And so we move on from the negative with the positive being always the same size to now prints in different sizes and formats. So this is the start of photography, really, I would say, very similar to contemporary photography, where we love to now print in even larger sizes, but it's really depending on the machines. We have the enlarger, and of course, the whole industry around photography has also changed and evolved. So I quote Sudek here, saying that negative would be like a music sheet. Well, you would have a director really has to be able to read this music sheet, and this all happens in the dark room. It's about this interpretation of the negative, which will express colors differently depending on light level. I'm sure all of you in the room are very much used to this development,
aussi.
printing in dark
Alors là,
rooms.
vous avez
So you
ici
know
dans
that
un
it will
important,
depend
si à la fin,
on
quelqu'un veut les regarder,
the light, of course,
vous
but
aviez
also
à
the
l'époque, et c'est
paper.
pour
Here
ça que
in
je
this
vous ai
booklet
présenté tout
I
à l'heure la
brought,
destruction des usines Kodak.
we showed you the
Ici,
Kodak
vous avez des
factories,
quantités
the way they were
énormes
destroyed,
et
and the
magnifiques de
catastrophe
papier
that it
absolument
is,
superbes.
because
Je
they
me rappelle
had
très
such
bien d'un
wonderful
photographe qui était
types of
bien connu, qui
papers for silver
s'appelait
prints.
René Jacques,
I remember
qui me
René
disait, tiens,
Jacques,
cette
wonderful
photo-là,
photographer, who used to
je
tell
l'ai
me,
tirée
you
sur du
see this
papier
photo,
velours. Il
I
avait du
printed
papier
it
velours.
on
Donc le
velvet
choix du papier,
paper. There
c'était
was
aussi,
a
et
velvet paper. This
ça donnait
choice of
aussi
the
sa
material of the
matérialité
paper
à la
would give
photographie.
the materiality that the photographer
Juste
is looking
une
for
observation
to
sur cette question
this
de
image.
cette idée de la
Yes, just
musique.
related to
Il
this
y a des
music
années
sheet
décennies, j'ai
idea.
vu une exposition à New
Decades
York où
ago,
ils ont
I saw
invité
an exhibition in New
30
York
photographes
where they
de
invited
faire
30
leur travail
photographers
à partir de même négatif.
to present
Juste
their
pour montrer
prints
exactement ça,
based on the
la gamme de
same
possibilités
negative
est infinie en
film.
fait. Mais le public pense
There are infinite
négatif va
possibilities
donner toujours le même
because
résultat. Et
people
c'est pas
may
le cas.
think that using the same
Oui,
negative,
c'est pour ça,
we
je
will
suis
have the
parvenu sur le
same
titre de cette petite
result,
intervention
but
qui
it's not
s'appelle
true.
La
Yes,
photographie à
the
multiples
title,
rares.
of course,
Quand
of this
on
conversation is
s'intéresse un petit peu
photography
près
a rare
la
multiple.
photographie, c'est une
Because if
expression
we look
d'Alain
closer,
Paviot, hein, et
it's
on
an Alain
s'aperçoit qu'en fait, le
Paviot
tirage, il y a autant
expression
de possibilités d'abord à
and
l'époque,
phrase,
donc il n'y avait
because
pas
we know
énormément,
that it,
hein, on
back
ne
in
faisait
the
pas
days we didn't
beaucoup de
print
tirages, et
so
en
many
plus, chacun
times,
avait sa personnalité, il y avait cette fameuse
and every
intention.
print
Ici,
has
là, je
their
vois pas
own
s'il y a des collectionneurs,
personality
aux
and their
États-Unis,
own
je crois que c'est
intent.
Paul
In
Messier
the US, I think it is
qui fait
Paul
des collections,
Messier who
de
presented
toutes les
this
banques
collection.
de
He
papier
collected
photographique,
all the
papier
different
photographique.
types of paper
Alors,
available for
dans la chambre
photography.
noire, il va se
In
passer
the
aussi
dark
quelque
room,
chose de très important parce
what
qu'on va
happens?
travailler avec des papiers, on
Of
va
course, we are
régler
working
les
with a
lumières,
certain type of
régler les
paper. We need
éclairages,
to set the
mais
level of
qu'est-ce qu'on va faire
light.
aussi? On va
We need lighting
recadrer.
and we also
Voilà. Alors,
reframe.
ici, une petite anecdote,
And
enfin,
just
c'est quelque chose
a
assez
short
important quand
story
même.
I would
Voilà
like
une
to
photographie de
share
Man Ray.
here. We see
Man Ray
a
a fait ses
photography
premières
by
photos,
Man Ray.
et c'est une photo
So
qui a
Man
été
Ray shot
solarisée. Vous voyez,
this photography and it
c'est un
is
phénomène
a
qui se passe au moment du
solarized
tirage,
photography.
au
This
moment
happens
soit du développement
during
du négatif ou du
during
tirage. Donc c'est
printing,
une très belle
printing or
photo. Mais
negative
cette photo a été,
reveal. And
ça n'est pas la photo que voulait Man Ray.
this is not actually exactly the photo,
Voilà la photo de
the
Man Ray.
picture Man Ray
Man Ray a fait cette première photo
wanted.
et il a dit, moi,
Man Ray
enfin c'est
took
vrai, on
this
pourrait presque dire qu'il est un petit
photograph
peu pas banal,
and we could say it looks
et
a
il
little
a
bit
cherché ce qu'il voulait
trivial,
rendre exactement
perhaps
dans la photo de ce corps, et
common.
ça,
What
c'est
he
Man Ray.
wanted to reveal in
Et
this picture of the
toujours,
body is
eh bien,
this
c'était chez
section, this
Swan, la
cropped
maison de vente de
section.
New
So
York.
at
Un jour est passée cette
Swan
photographie
in New York,
et
one
mon
day
cher
this
mari Alain
photograph was
Paviot
exposed,
a
and
tout de
my
suite
husband,
téléphoné chez Swan
Alain
en disant,
Paviot,
écoutez, vous ne
called
pouvez pas vendre, mettre en vente cette photographie
chez Swan
parce que Man
immediately,
Ray n'a
said,
jamais voulu
"You
ce
cannot
tirage. C'est un tirage
exhibit
qui a
this
été fait
photography." Man Ray never
ailleurs, qui a
wanted
été fait par
this
quelqu'un d'autre,
photograph to
mais
be
qui n'est pas le bon
displayed
tirage.
like
C'est
this.
pas
It is
son
not the
tirage.
right
Ce
print.
qu'il
It is
faut,
not
c'est ça.
representing the
Voilà.
intent of
Et
the
la
photographer.
photographie, on
This
s'est
shows
aperçu
the
tout
intent
à
of the
fait que Alain avait
photographer.
raison,
And we
et on a
realized
retiré
Alain
la
was
photographie de la
absolutely
vente.
right, and so
Alors,
we
cette
removed
photographie précédente, elle
this
est
photograph
intéressante parce
from
qu'elle
this
montre justement comment un photographe va
exhibition. It's, I
choisir
think, an
la donner
illustration, a
corps à
perfect
son
example of
négatif,
how the
mais ça
photograph will
reste
then reveal
documentaire.
Qu'est-ce
their
qui s'est passé
photography
avec cette
according
photographie?
to
Et
their
cette
intent.
photographie a
And
été
what
retirée de
happened
la vente. On
where this
sait,
photograph
on
was
y a encore
removed,
calé
was
tout ce qu'il
withdrawn
faut
from
pour les
that
petites histoires de tirage,
sale?
etc.
Of
Mais
course,
elle a
there
été
are
retirée de la
always
vente. Alors c'est
this
vrai que vous
type of
pouvez l'avoir chez
anecdotes
vous, la
exists,
mettre chez
and
votre
of
mur,
course you
pourquoi pas.
could
Mais
use this
comme je
image,
dis, vous
display it
pouvez
on
avoir ce
your
que vous
wall at
voulez, mais
home. Why
sachez
not?
ce que vous
You
avez.
could,
Voilà.
you should, but you should know whether this was the intent behind this photography or not.
Donc, et voilà un autre exemple de
And
recadrage.
another
Vous
example
voyez
of how
ici
an
à
image can
droite,
be
vous avez la
framed,
photographie originale.
reframed, or
Donc le
cropped.
vintage, ça
You
veut
can
dire
see
ce
on
que
the
veut dire
right-hand
ici le
side the
vintage, c'est pas
original
forcément
photograph, and we
le
wanted to
négatif original.
tell you
La
here
photo
that
telle qu'elle a été prise au
vintage doesn't
départ.
necessarily mean
Voilà la
exactly the
photo
picture
telle
that
qu'elle a
was
été
shot
prise
at
par
the
toujours Man
start.
Ray.
First
Et
picture
voici
taken by Man
le
Ray,
tirage, le
again, and you can
recadrage.
see
Vous
on the
voyez ce qui
left-hand
se passe si
side,
vous
once
regardez
it
bien.
is
Il y a un
actually
petit effet
cropped,
d'optique.
you
Et
see
ces
this
deux blancs,
beautiful
je dirais,
optical
enfin je ne vais pas dire ça, mais enfin quand même,
illusion, we could say, the
les deux
two
portraits sont
south, Because the two portraits, you could say it is a little bit trivial, common perhaps, but on the left-hand side, it is a much more powerful image because the mouth, the nose with the dark space in between, a flower appears. This was the intent Man Ray wanted to display, to reveal. Yes, this right-hand side photography is actually currently exhibited, and it is actually very interesting to see all the different crops Man Ray tried out of this photography. So it is exhibited with a doll next to it. And so we have to note that, yes, Man Ray attempted to actually produce on the left-hand side, he's created different versions with colors, etc. It's become an object and many derivative versions. Yes, we wanted to actually insist on and highlight this photographer's intent. Some photographers like to print, and I would like to mention Pierre Gassman, he created the picto laboratories. He used to tell me, I know the photographer, I know what they are looking for, and I know how to print this for them, because they were close, they were friends with the photographer, between the photographer and the printer. Yes, and we have to think about photographers, of course, they have a specific idea of what they would like to reveal, but the printer also will adjust the levels of colors, the right paper. And so, of course, this printer will have also a specific idea about how to reveal. They have a level of sensitivity, I suppose. Some will just print as is, and or it can take weeks to adjust exactly the right colors. I know that some will take
Françoise,
this craft,
y
this
a-t-il des
trade
cas où les
differently?
photographes,
Yes, I wanted to ask a question.
parlons toujours de vintage.
If we
Prenons
are
une
still talking
photographe,
about vintage
photographiée en
photography, and
1922
so taking a picture
et
in
vintage,
1922,
et ensuite 5 ans plus tard,
for
qui
example,
a l'autre
or
et il préfère
5 years
l'autre.
later,
Est-ce qu'il y a
printing
une gamme de échelle de valeur?
the
Est-ce que
same
pour les
photography, would
collectionneurs,
there be a different value attached to it for a collector? Of course, there is that value scale we have to mention. It's not always actually identical. I mentioned the Z model and Diana Arbus photography is more famous, but Lisette Model, when she passed away, we found out she had a lot of prints from the 40s, small formats, because she didn't really have a lot of money. She did several small prints, dense prints, because that was her style. And 40 years down the line, in the 70s, a portfolio was created for her prints in larger size to promote her work. And these prints are beautiful. But we know that she preferred to exhibit the earlier prints. And we know that institutions now prefer to actually find the original prints we found under her bed decades ago compared to the prints from the 70s, looking a bit more flat. Yes, I would react to what you shared here, Jonas. I was going to mention that later on, but you gave me a transition. We saw with Henri Cartier-Bresson, just a short story, we had an exhibition at our gallery on Henri Cartier-Bresson's work. He was already fairly old. It was 2 years before he passed away. He came with his cane. I thought, oh, when he came in the gallery, I thought he's going to tell me off. But he told me, Madame, why are you exhibiting these old prints when now there are such amazing, very good prints available from laboratories? And so I am sharing the story, which is actually written here by Brigitte Ollier, this short book called titled Henry. I said, well, I worked at Centre Georges Pompidou, and at Georges Pompidou, we bought the chair La Chaise by Le Corbusier, a print from the 30s, we have to say actually this chair, actually this leather is aging. The fabric underneath is actually coming apart. The jute. And so we know that we can no longer present this chair by Le Corbusier the way that he wanted. At Cassina, the armchair, you can see the drawing. The drawing by Le Corbusier is still as beautiful. We bought, I think, this work 60,000 or 70,000 euros. Now at Le Cassina, it costs 10,000 euros. It is a new version of this object, but it is not the same object. So this is very much related to buying vintage objects. You can choose to buy one or the other. It is up to you, but I think you should be fully informed. That's what matters. And the original print, modern print, or what we call posterior print or post-event print. Yes, we mentioned vintage prints. And of course, this idea of trying to be as close as the photographer's intent as we can. Talking about Chirico painting in the 20s or painting again in the 50s, we know we want to have access to these works. He wanted to, with what he wanted to reveal. So we know these prints revealed right after the shoot. And then I know in France, we talk about lifetime prints. Lifetime prints very much reveals what the photographers wanted to reveal. We know that it could be reprinted during for a specific exhibition, for a specific gallery. So these modern prints, we know for Cartier-Bresson, we know this is a 30s print, 40s print or 50s print, which may sound abstract today, but the idea is to compare for you. You should know as a viewer whether this print from the 30s, from the 40s, from the 50s. It is our work as experts, specialists. Of course, you will know it will look much more beautiful if you see the print from the 50s compared to the 70s print, which looks like a photocopy. It just looks like a copy compared to that grain specificity of the print from the 50s. But really, the essence is in the comparison. If we don't have anything to compare with, we have to have the knowledge to understand the depth of differences. So in terms of what we call posterior prints, so post death of the photographer. So how significant is it? It depends who is printing, because certain photographers we know, they were using the same printer, a certain printer where they were alive, and the same printer continues printing after their death. Then we can think that we are as close to the quality the photographer wanted to achieve because the printer is the same. But we can think there are photographies being printed also later on. So certain prints, posthumous prints, are more expensive, others are cheaper. The Man Ray picture, we could think it is 100,000 euros for a lifetime print, whereas it would be 1,000 euros in a posthumous print, because it's not so much related with the photographies back.
To come back on what Jonas says, you have a famous photograph from Ajay, the models in I think there is only one copy in the world. Ajay died in 1927, and Bernie Sabat, when he died, bought the negative. Julian Levy, it was her gallery, so she brought prints, but she also brought negatives. So here I force a little bit, but here Eugène Adjé from so it's a lifetime print, and here is a posterior one from the negative of Eugène Adjé, which is not of the same nature. That was printed in the 30s, as Jonas says. I would, you said, okay, well, it might cost 100,000 for the lifetime prints and 5,000 for the ones post-mortem. I wanted to tell you that it's not because it's old that it's a good print. Of course, some can't be seen anymore. You can't see anything on the photograph. Well, except if you want. From a marketing point of view, it has no worth. And at the back, you see Photo Adjé, and you have the name of Julien Lévy, the gallery. Everything is indicated there. It's not the same amount, but as it is from the 30s, it also has some value. Here again, I would like to talk about colleagues who are on the fair. Auguste Sander. These, I don't know if it's the son or the grandson of Auguste Sander. Julian Sander exhibits a series of photographs at the entrance. I recommend you to go and see them. So from the negatives of his grandfather, he made some prints. So it's posterior prints. Well, I didn't put the back, it's a pity. Well, everything is indicated at the back. So the original, I haven't had it, but I think it was sold for 80,000 euros. That's what you would imagine? Yes. And I sold one. I had a posterior one that I sold 8,000 euros in Sotheby. So it's related to Jürgen Nevsger, who works with chambers. Just to tell you that former tools can be used by contemporary photographers. I would like to come back to a former photograph. I forgot something important. Here you have a very well-known photograph by Man Ray, Le Violon d'Ingres. Another anecdote here. This violon d'Ingres was made, I think, in 1927, and in the 60s, the merchant of Man Ray tells him, "You made a very nice photograph of Kiki. Let's make a new print." Man Ray was always happy to earn some money. Sometimes it's the responsibility of galleries to reprint some former photographs. So Man Ray says, "Okay, good idea." And he couldn't find his negative. So nothing there. He said, "Okay, I know. Who has the original print?" "It's André Breton." Okay, they went to André Breton. They took the photograph, and what they did, they photographed the photograph. So it's called a countertype. It's the copy of an image when you have lost the negative. So this photo is unique. You are the expert. You can see it in Beaubourg because they don't. For the surrealism exhibition, they took it out, which is not often. And it's currently exhibited, so it's quite a unique opportunity to see this print. On the market, we have seen many modern prints. Or
Voilà. Alors là, vous avez ici un gros plan.
here
Le
you
tirage,
have
je sais pas comment dire ça, on pourrait dire que ça va friser le million d'euros si on l'envoie
a shot that is worth 1 million euros. That from the 60s was sold 12 million. So the original, yeah, this close-up is has become the Mona Lisa of photography. So this. The other day I was walking in the street and I saw a girl who had these two things tattooed on her back. It now entered popular pop culture. It has become totally iconic. The original print, which is in Pompidou, it's not a game for experts. There's a real added value to see it because it's much nicer than what was printed afterwards. When you compare different prints, if you do not compare, you cannot understand the difference. So the edition was made with Arthur Rochouat in 10 copies, I guess. So on the photograph, you have Man Ray had signed his original copy, and he signed again. So you have a signature on the image and another one on the copy, on the print, the new print. So I would like to come back.
Les Auguste Sander, Jürgen Levsger. Donc on revient les surfaces sensibles.
So sensitive surfaces. I will now mention the film we saw earlier on. So the silver photograph. So the manufacturing of sensitive surface is increasingly disappearing. Yeah, it is true that the video is interesting because it was absolutely dramatic. Kodak was the biggest photography company. They were making very small and cheap cameras, but they had many labs, catalogs of thousands of products that they sell to reveal, fix the photographs, and this stopped in 2012 in Rochester. It was dramatic because the whole city was working for Kodak, 3,000 or 4,000 people, I guess. It was an absolute drama. The end of Kodak, well, the city was, the whole city was unemployed. And I read an article that Kodak did not want to go to digital. They were stuck to silver, so that led to this catastrophe. Here is Robert Burles. It's a Canadian photographer who photographed all the destroyed Kodak manufacturers. It looks like a funeral. And to tell you that contemporary photographers, Bogdan Konopka, for instance, he printed on paper and that does not exist anymore. And you see this photograph is a vintage. Why would it be a vintage? Because it's a sort of paper that does not exist anymore. I can't find it anymore. And he was very sensitive to the fact that his photographs didn't have the same look as before. Bogdan is in the Le Douche Gallery, Marc Revedel in the Luisotti Gallery, and Marc, I had some prints in my gallery, and Marc asked me on a regular basis, can you send me prints, because I do not have such paper. And some photographers kept stocks of papers in refrigerators. So that's a process that completely disappeared. Cibachrome. You can't find such prints anymore. I think Roland Dufault did it, but he completely stopped. I began with photography in the 70s. I'm Swiss, at the end of the 70s. And I remember very well, photography was in black and white. And I remember that sometimes photographers came to my gallery and said, I'm very sad because the paper that I like to work with does not exist anymore. I have to go to Toronto to buy it. A few years later, the same photographer, now I have to go to New York because I can't find them in Toronto. So it's a really decreasing line. As Françoise said, people said, I bought as much stock as possible, and 2 years afterwards, it's over. You can't find this paper anymore. Why this paper hunt? Well, it's quality that interests them. Cibachrome, and you can see some of them in here in the fair. There's some magic in these Cibachromes. These prints are just marvelous. Former prints are very rich in silver salts, which is very interesting for the violon d'Ingres, because the print is absolutely beautiful. When papers are not that good, it's sort of flat. Some digital prints are good too, but it provides you a certain depth. I think that in the 50s and 60s, they progressively took some silver out of the paper. Yes, maybe there was also a big change in the paper industry in the 50s. That's how we can determine the date of a photography. With ultraviolet light, you can determine whether the photograph is from before or after the 50s, because products changed at that period. Something interesting too, a photograph, you always have to look at its back. And there are specialists. There are 2 books that were published. Well, 6 of them were published, because according to the stamps, you can determine the date of the photograph. Here is Brassailles. It is true that it helps beyond the fact that you can see they are different. It helps you determine the date. Okay, that's the photograph he did in Paris at that period for that exhibition. It provides you with additional information. You told me Avedon put very detailed information at the back of his photographs. Yes, there, at least for the market, there's this notion to, well, you want to know what you buy. The more information you find, the better. It's a tribal science, so to speak. Sometimes you can't have a proof, but if Avedon, at the back of all his prints, there is a signing, a stamp with a silver print, toned, blah, 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 and then the edition, not exceeding 50 prints or something. And also, which techniques, which edition, a copyright stamp, everything is at the back of the photograph. So photographers such as Avedon of Kate Print have had a commercial success because of that, because you know what you buy. In this market, multiple market, you never know how many prints there are. How many prints of Cartier-Bresson? Nobody knows. When they began to put numbers on their prints, in Paris Photo there's also an edition, but for Brassailles you can't find any edition. It's only with the stamp that you may know that if it's a rare or not print. Sometimes you have to trust the merchant the gallerist, who will tell you, who will be able to determine the date of the photograph. Well, Sugimoto indicates the number, the edition, and a dry stamp with a reference number and a signature. Sugimoto does it for every print, so you can't have photographs with or without. Okay, it makes it more readable for a collector. That's why Man Ray market is quite difficult, because he did a little bit of everything. It's also a detective, an investigation work. This morning in my hotel, I saw a very nice framed photograph. I took the photograph, and I think it's a vintage print. So I took it out of the frame, I turned it, and at the back there was a stamp saying Vienna, another one Berlin, and a small paper with a sort of explanation, a small text. It is dated, but the year is lost. It shows January 11th, but no year. But it's clearly a vintage print. That's why I tell you it's a detective work. I have to ask a Vienna specialist to tell me about the agency that circulated the photograph, and maybe we can find a photographer. So I come to Paris to discover a vintage photograph, and in my hotel, I'm not going to say which hotel. It's because you have an eye. Some of you, I see a collector here, someone who collects African statues. How do you... I see Charlotte Barthélemy, who's an expert for Le Moine. I had seen the catalogue, and I saw the photographs, and I said to Charlotte, it's incredible, the difference when you see them for real. Today you find reproductions, you see them on a screen, on the internet, but to see them for real, it's totally different. And it is important to watch them.
On voulait
So
terminer sur la...
we wanted to end with
Parce qu'il est quand même, il est presque 52, on a 8 minutes. Est-ce qu'on passe juste à la conservation ou
shall we talk about conservation?
dire quelque chose?
Non, peut-être
No.
le jeu détective
I would like to come back on the idea of being a detective.
Par exemple, pour Man Ray, pour donner une idée
for Man Ray, and to tell you a little bit about expertise. When you have a photograph of Man Ray, we'll have a look at the dimensions. Through the dimensions, we know if he did it in Europe or in the States, because formats are not the same. According to the size, we may know if it was for publication or not. Is it a beautiful paper? Was it for an exhibition? Or is it a more simple paper for the press? Then we have a look at the signature. Is it an original signature or a late one? Sometimes he signed with a wrong date, or as the negatives are in Pompidou, we know the exact dates and not the dates indicated by Man Ray at the back of the photograph. So it's a detective game, so to speak. Very quickly, I would like to tell you about conservation. It's also something important. We saw a bad adjet. Of course, you do not buy a photograph. Alain Paviot often says photography is not a stamp, post stamp, as the chair by Charlotte Perriand. So these photographs are not small, so prints have lived. Some contemporary photographers claim that if their prints age, well, they say, well, it will age, that's it. We're all submitted to the passing of time. When I tell someone, I will love you always, well, it's for 70 years maximum. So it's also a condition when you buy a photograph. It has to be in a good shape. You have to look at them in a with a specific light. There are acceptable accidents or not acceptable. When you go to the metro and you buy a can, a Coca-Cola can, or a pack of sweets at the end of an exhibition, you can also buy prints at the end of an exhibition. You choose the photograph, you choose the frame, the dimension, and you put your credit card, you pay, and you get a print. And sometimes people think it's expensive. You can also take a photograph from a magazine and frame it. Here is what you can find on the internet. You can find different versions. That's a print from Gustave Le Gray, and you have many possibilities. So I always come back to this sentence: you have to know what you have bought, but the pleasure is what counts. Sometimes something is very expensive and you may want to buy something cheaper, but you have to know what you buy. You can also have it as a
Donc, tu
cushion,
comprends bien que la photographie est devenue un
which shows
objet
that
qui
photography
se répand et qui
is
fait
an
partie de
object
notre
that is
quotidien,
disseminated and which is part and parcel of
qui
our daily
donc, est
lives.
devenue une formule
And it
naturelle. Et comme
has
dit,
become
je cite
something
souvent la
natural.
formule d'André Rouillet, qui dit
André Rouillet
maintenant
often
l'appareil
says
photo est
now
devenu une
the
application
camera has become
comme une autre
an
dans
app
notre
as any other
mobile, dans notre
in our
appareil.
mobile.
Voilà. Ça n'est... Bien. Oui, si vous avez, parce qu'il est 57, je crois qu'on a 10 petites minutes.
I think
On a
we have
l'autorisation,
some 10 minutes.
si vous avez des questions.
If you have some questions,
peut circuler.
the mic can circulate.
Question.
Pas de questions.
No question?
Est-ce que ça vous a intéressé?
Were you interested? Thank you.
Voilà, moi, en ce qui me concerne, vous êtes toujours
As far as I'm
bienvenus à la
concerned,
galerie,
you're
même sans-
very
parce qu'il y a certaines personnes qui me disent
welcome
quelquefois, mais vous
in the
savez, j'ai
gallery.
pas d'argent, je peux pas acheter.
I have no
Et
money, I
c'est pas
can't
un
buy.
problème. Je vous dis
It's
pas
not
que
a
je recevrai
problem.
tout le temps 24 heures sur 24.
I can't be
Mais
there
s'il y a des points qui vous
24/7, but
intéressent, vous êtes les
if you're
bienvenus. Et on
interested,
peut
you're
téléphoner
very
et
much
on
welcome.
peut
You call
discuter,
me
regarder
and
des
we
choses
can
ensemble.
discuss and
C'est toujours un
look at
plaisir de
things
parler, de
together.
partager ce qu'on
Together,
a vu. Voilà.
it's always a pleasure to share what you like.
Oui.
J'ai une question.
I have a question.
Je suis commissaire des expositions. Je travaille
I'm
souvent
a
avec des
curator.
photographes vivants.
I very often work with living photographers and dead photographers. I prefer dead ones because they are less problematic.
Mort soudainement pendant un projet. Et je cite un exemple.
I would like to give you a quote. A photographer told me that there are extraordinary on the last negatives, 35 photographs or 36. He never had the time to print them because he died suddenly. So there was something in his camera that he thought was very interesting. So with his widow, we printed them. He had never seen them, and we clearly indicated how they were made. So they have a value. And if I quote another instance, I made a retrospective of Blumenfeld, and I found in his studio, in a drawer, an extraordinary photograph. Blumenfeld, naked, giving birth to a beautiful woman. I invented the beautiful woman, he said something. The family did not want to print it. I found the negative, sorry. So I said, it's so extraordinary and psychologically extraordinary. It was proof that he had invented of modern beauty. They authorized the printing for the book. As many of you, we have curators in the room. In these situations, strange situations, the thing I always respect is to indicate what it means. That's the main thing. You have to know what you're looking at. Then we provided you with the general rules. There are many exceptions because each life is different. At one point he entered or she entered the market or never did, or they have different lives most of the time. So the marker has to adapt to the existing prints. The market will not dictate what happens. It's the other way around. The market adapts. The photographer decides if they want to make 3 or 5 copies. And these were post-mortem photographs. Yeah, you have to negotiate with the heirs from a documentary point of view. It's interesting and it's also beautiful. About the market, I was with Alice Joubert, a former student from ESA, who now heads the Galerie Rhin. She gave me an example of a widow who said, okay, now that he's dead, we will not print anything anymore. In what we said, it's always our interpretation, but what is interesting is to understand and to ask the questions. There are never no question is stupid. Thank you so much.
Le petit cahier de tirage là, c'est